let me tell you a story. One that will leave your blood running cold and make you think twice about venturing into the wilderness. Imagine yourself in the depths of a jungle, far from the comforts of civilization. The air is thick, the shadows move like whispers, and the eyes that watch you from the dark are no longer alive. What would you do if you were trapped in a place where the very creatures of the wild turned into undead predators, hunting with a hunger that death could not quench? Before we dive into this terrifying tale, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button, and let us know in the comments what your strategy would be if faced with zombie animals in the jungle. Now, brace yourself for a journey you'll never forget. Carlos, that was his name. A seasoned ranger, the kind of man who could tell you which way was north just by feeling the moss on a tree trunk. He had worked in the Jaguar rainforest for years, patrolling its endless green labyrinth to keep poachers and illegal loggers at bay. It was a job he loved, until the day the jungle betrayed him. It began like any other patrol. The morning sun filtered through the thick canopy, casting long, dappled shadows on the forest floor. The air was damp, filled with the earthy aroma of moss and decaying leaves. Birds called to each other in the distance, their songs a familiar soundtrack to Carlos's routine. Yet, something felt off. The jungle was too quiet. For those who spend their lives in the wild, silence is an alarm bell. The absence of chirping insects and rustling leaves was unnatural, almost suffocating. It made the hairs on the back of Carlos's neck stand on end. He gripped his rifle a little tighter and pressed on. It wasn't long before he stumbled upon the first sign of something wrong. A clearing up ahead caught his eye, its edges marked with crushed foliage as if something large had barreled through. There, in the center, lay a capybara, a creature he had seen countless times before. But this one was different. Its body was stiff, unnaturally still, and its fur was matted with what looked like dried blood. Carlos crouched down, his heart heavy. It wasn't unusual to find dead animals in the jungle. Predators and disease were part of the cycle of life. But as he reached out to inspect the carcass, its eyes snapped open. Carlos froze. The capybara's head twisted toward him, its neck cracking like a dry branch. Its gaze was hollow, its pupils clouded with a sickly white sheen. Then, it moved, jerking, spasming, its body unnaturally contorted as it lunged for him. Carlos barely managed to roll out of the way. His instincts took over and he fired his rifle. The bullet struck true, tearing through the creature's skull, collapsed in a heap, motionless. But the relief was short-lived. As Carlos stepped closer, the capybara's body began to twitch. Its limbs convulsed, bending in ways that defied anatomy. Then, with a wet, sickening sound, it rose again, the gaping hole in its head oozing black ichor. "What the hell?" Carlos whispered, his voice trembling. He ran. It wasn't a calculated retreat. It was pure, unthinking panic. Branches clawed at his face as he pushed through the undergrowth, the sounds of the jungle transforming into a cacophony of growls and snarls. He could feel it in his gut. He wasn't alone anymore. As he sprinted, shadows moved around him. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but then he saw them. A troop of monkeys swarmed the trees above, their flesh hanging in strips from their tiny bodies. Their faces were a grotesque blend of decay and rage, their shrill screeches echoing through the jungle like a macabre symphony. On the ground, a jaguar padded silently through the ferns, its golden coat marred by deep, festering wounds. Its eyes glowed faintly, not with life but with something far darker. And behind it, Carlos caught glimpses of other creatures. A snake coiling unnaturally around a tree trunk, a bird flapping with one wing torn away. The jungle was alive, yes, but not with life. It was teeming with death. Hours passed, though they felt like an eternity. Carlos had run until his legs felt like lead, finally collapsing behind a fallen tree to catch his breath. As he crouched there, panting, his mind raced to make sense of what he'd seen. Was it some kind of disease? A mutation? But how could something so unnatural exist? His thoughts were interrupted by a sound, a low, metallic hum, almost imperceptible beneath the rustle of leaves. It came from somewhere deeper in the jungle, drawing him like a moth to a flame. What he found was beyond anything he could have imagined. The path opened into a clearing, and there it stood, a crumbling building, half swallowed by the jungle. Vines snaked up its walls, and the windows were shattered, their jagged edges glinting like teeth. The sight of human architecture in this untouched wilderness was jarring, like a scar on a pristine canvas. Carlos hesitated, but curiosity or desperation pushed him forward. Inside, the air was thick with decay and the faint, acrid scent of chemicals. The walls were lined with shattered glass tanks, each large enough to hold a full-grown animal. Instruments lay scattered across rusting metal tables, their functions unrecognizable. On the floor, a pile of papers caught his eye. He sifted through them, his fingers trembling as he read words like neural reanimation, viral mutation, and Project Lazarus. His heart sank as the truth became clear. This wasn't just a lab, it was a breeding ground for horror. One file in particular caught his attention. It detailed experiments on local wildlife using a virus designed to stimulate dead tissue. The aim had been to create bioweapons that could survive in any condition. But something had gone horribly wrong. The virus had spread beyond containment, infecting the very ecosystem it had been tested on. A map pinned to the wall showed the lab and its surrounding areas. Marked in bold red was the phrase viral release point. Carlos's eyes widened. The circle overlapped the very jungle he had just fled through. As he turned to leave, a sound froze him in his tracks. A low, guttural growl. The jaguar was there, its massive frame blocking the exit. Its rotting flesh quivered, and its eyes locked onto Carlos with an unholy hunger. He fired his rifle, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. The jaguar leapt, its claws raking across his shoulder. Pain seared through him as he fell backward, his weapon clattering to the floor. In desperation, he grabbed a shard of broken glass and plunged it into the creature's neck. Black ichor sprayed out, and the jaguar let out a haunting, otherworldly screech. Carlos didn't wait to see if it would rise again. Clutching the map, he fled into the jungle. Hours later, battered and bleeding, Carlos stumbled onto a dirt road. Relief washed over him as he spotted the distant lights of a nearby town. But his relief turned to dread when he heard the screams. The virus had already spread. The undead animals had reached the town, turning its streets into a battleground. Dogs with lifeless eyes attacked their owners. Birds dived from the skies like kamikaze missiles, and rats swarmed in waves, biting and clawing at anything they could reach. Carlos stood frozen, the map still clutched in his hand. He had survived the jungle, but the nightmare was far from over. The virus was out, and nothing could stop it now. And that, my friends, is how the nightmare began. A single man's desperate escape was just the first chapter in a story of unimaginable horror. The jungle unleashed its terror upon the world, and the question remains: if you were in Carlos's shoes, would you have made it out alive? If this story sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of the dark and mysterious. And remember, the next time you hear a rustle in the woods, it might not just be the wind. Sleep well, if you can.